Tiana Pinckney, a K-3 literacy consultant with the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. Welcome to another installment in our Hot Summer Topics video series. Today's hot summer topic is a continuation from last week's video entitled Evidence-Based Instructional Routines in Early Reading, where we are embarking on the journey of providing a brief overview of the IES practice guide entitled Foundational Skills to Support Reading for Understanding in Kindergarten through 3rd grade. The previous video focused on recommendations 1 and 2, which concentrated on how to teach students academic language skills as well as segmenting sounds and speech and how they link to letters. This video will focus on the final 2 recommendations in the practice guide. On the Padlet, you will find a handout that can be used for note-taking. You will also find a helpful handout for explicit instruction in a virtual setting that is applicable for the recommendations we will discuss. Recommendation 3 builds on Recommendation 2. It recommends that educators teach students to decode words, analyze word parts, and write and recognize words. Here are the suggested instructional practices to carry out Recommendation 3. According to the practice guide, by implementing the instructional practices outlined for this recommendation, students will acquire the ability to decode and read words as they become more complex in isolation or connected text, as well as write words. This recommendation can be carried out once a student has acquired a few consonants and vowels. Let's start with instructional practice number 1. Teach students to blend letter sounds and sound spelling patterns from left to right within a word to produce a recognizable pronunciation. This involves teaching students how to blend chunks of sounds or sound out letter by letter going from left to right in a word. Number 2, instruct students in common sound spelling patterns. This includes teaching students how certain letters can be combined to produce unique sounds that appear in multiple words. A list of sound spelling patterns can be found in the practice guide on page 25. The practice guide also mentions the following recommendations for instruction. Present the letter combinations one at a time. Allow ample time to focus on each combination and how to pronounce it correctly. Provide examples that include familiar words to illustrate the pronunciation. Start with initial consonants, then introduce vowel and syllable construction patterns as students progress. Let's listen to an instructional routine called Phoneme grapheme mapping that can be used in the classroom and virtually in a small group setting that aligns with this suggested practice.
Phoneme grapheme mapping is an evidence-based approach which supports orthographic mapping in the brain. It's important to remember when phoneme grapheme mapping that one box equals one sound. There's no inventive spelling, and dialogue matters. We ask, what sounds do you hear, and what letters do you write? As the students name the letters for each sound, they write them in each box. We also ask, is the sound voiced or unvoiced? A voiced sound is one which, when you lay your hand upon your throat and produce the sound, you can feel a vibration. An unvoiced sound would feel no vibration. We also ask, is it a stopping or continuous sound? A stopping sound is produced and stops. A continuous sound can be produced and continued until one runs out of breath. For example, the sound t for T is a stop. The sound m for M is continuous. Let's try an example. The word is mat. What's the word?
Mat.
Segment it. Mat. What's the first sound you hear in the word mat? Is voiced or unvoiced?
Voiced.
Is it stopping or continuous?
Continuous.
What's the letter name?
M.
Write it. What's the second sound you hear in the word mat?
A.
Voiced or unvoiced?
voiced,
Stopping or continuous?
continuous,
Letter name?
A,
Write it. What's the third sound you hear in the word mat? Is it voiced or unvoiced?
unvoiced,
Stopping or continuous?
stopping,
Letter name?
T,
Write it. Now write the word on the side and spell it aloud. M-A-T, mat. At this time, we would body map the word by standing up, touching our head for the sound M, our shoulders for A, and our waist for T, and spell the word mat. We also call this speller size, and it involves our gross motor skills in the process, which makes this an even more interactive learning strategy.
Now we move on to the third suggested instructional practice. Teach students to recognize common word parts. This involves teaching students how to analyze, construct, and manipulate words through the recognition and use of word parts. Here is a suggested list of what to teach from the practice guide. Suffixes, contractions, forms of prefixes, basic roots, and how to form words based on a combination of the items above. Number 4, have students read decodable words in isolation and in text. It is crucial that students are given the opportunity to practice the various letter sounds and sound spelling patterns they have been taught. The types of text to use include word lists, decodable sentences, short decodable text, and texts that contain many examples of words spelled with recently learned letter sounds or sound spelling patterns. Number 5, teach regular and irregular high-frequency words so that students can recognize them efficiently. According to the guide, teaching students how to quickly recognize high-frequency words will enable their ability to focus more on the meaning of the text. For regular high-frequency words such as if and had, it is recommended that students are taught to apply letter sound knowledge in order to decode the word. The practice guide provides several strategies for teaching irregular high-frequency words, which incorporate the application of letter sound knowledge. One of the strategies suggests labeling the words as rule breakers and teaching them holistically. Holistically does not mean that one should simply teach students how to memorize the word. A holistic word study routine includes teaching the word meaning and etymology, followed by a procedural approach to mapping phonemes and graphemes. The next step is identifying the regular and irregular, quote-unquote, rule breaker spellings and having students label them as they proceed through the routine. We have come to the final instructional practice for recommendation 3. Introduce non-decodable words that are essential to the meaning of the text as whole words. The practice guide discusses how this applies to words found in text and composed of sound spelling patterns that students have not been taught and or irregular sound spelling patterns. Students should be introduced to a reasonable amount of unfamiliar non-decodable words before embarking in the practice of reading new text. As previously stated in the other recommendations, it is important that students are given the opportunity to apply what they have learned. Recommendation 4 emphasizes the practice of student application as well. It states, ensure that each student reads connected text every day to support reading accuracy, fluency, and comprehension. Reading connected text is more challenging than reading words or phrases in isolation. It is important to note that this recommendation pertains to providing suggested instructional practices at the word reading level. IES has crafted another practice guide entitled Improving Reading Comprehension in Kindergarten through 3rd grade, which provides more in-depth information surrounding the topic of constructing meaning during the reading process. Recommendation 4 includes these 3 instructional practices. Number 1. As students read orally, model strategies, scaffold, and provide feedback to support accurate and efficient word identification. As stated before in previous recommendations and demonstrated in the explicit instruction video for this hot summer topic video series, students should be given the opportunity to practice what has been taught to them through the gradual release method, I do, we do, you do, and move from practicing a certain skill in isolation to practicing it within a connected text. One suggestion that the practice guide gives is partnering students with a more proficient reader so that they engage in reading text and receive constructive feedback or support about the manner in which they read. Number 2, teach students to self-monitor their understanding of the text and to self-correct word reading errors. For example, if a sentence says, "The rabbit was hopping down the path," but the student reads, "The rabbit was hoping down the path," the teacher can say, "Wait a minute. Would a rabbit hope down a path?" What is another sound that O makes? Ah. Let's sound that out using the short O sound. Ah, ing. The rabbit was hopping down the path. These are not innate practices for many students. Therefore, it is important to explicitly teach and model these skills. Number 3, provide opportunities for oral reading practice with feedback to develop fluent and accurate reading with expression. With this learning opportunity for students, educators have the chance to model and or provide feedback in regard to reading with appropriate pace, expression, and meaningful phrases. Core reading and echo reading are some examples provided in the practice guide that teachers can use. All of the suggested instructional practices for recommendation 4 can occur in a virtual setting using small group or one-on-one virtual meetings. A resource from IES has been provided in the handout that will enable parents or guardians to support their child's reading at home. Let's take a look at various prompts that can be helpful as well when carrying out this recommendation. The practice guide provides prompts that educators and parents or guardians can use when directing students to apply word reading strategies. These prompts are important because they advocate for students to rely on the alphabetic principle to determine the pronunciation of words. To access the IES practice guide and for more information on the science of reading, please visit the Read to Achieve Reading Repository. And don't forget to share this video with colleagues and friends.